Hello and welcome to Ungoverned, snackable stories from me, Joan Sergel, a former town councilwoman from Huntington, New York, and an escapee from government and politics. If you're new here, prepare yourself for uninhibited storytelling about true events, experiences, and some pretty amazing people that have all left an indelible mark on me. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. I call these stories snackable because, for the most part, they're quick listens, crafted to get you in and out, and also to leave you with some snack food for thought. Today, I'm going to share the story of how 2 pennies got delivered to me directly from heaven. And the delivery time, without question, rivals Amazon, even on their best day. This story is also one to remind us all that the so-called veil between heaven and earth is thinner than we know. And as I learned, sometimes all it takes to pierce that veil is a little heart, some good music, and, so it seems, a little proximity to the dead. Would you like to know how it all happened? I thought you'd never ask. So, let me tell you then, right here, on this episode of Ungoverned. The idiom pennies from heaven originated with a 1936 song and motion picture by the same name popularized by Bing Crosby. It refers to unexpected good fortune or a windfall. It is also commonly believed that finding coins, especially pennies, is a sign from someone in heaven or on the other side, whichever you prefer. Have you ever asked for a sign from someone in heaven? I think most people would admit they have. And I'm no exception. In my case, I decided to ask for a sign that my parents had found each other in the afterlife on the occasion of what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary. And I was determined to do it in such a way that they could not ignore my simple request. There's nothing wrong with leaning into theatrics to bolster your chances of success. Now, in my podcast on death and dying plants, I shared the story of how my mom managed to send clear instructions to me shortly after she died, through, of all people, a coworker. Instructions, I should add, that demonstrated she was clearly aware of what was going on in the world she left behind. So, I shouldn't have been so surprised to get the proverbial wind knocked out of me after I dared to look to the heavens for answers not very long after that. Because people, this sort of thing never gets old. It all happened on September 17th, 2005, the 50th wedding anniversary of my parents. But as I mentioned earlier, they didn't live long enough to see the day. But here I was, looking to make a splash of it. I mean, it was a big anniversary, worthy of special attention. So I came up with a plan. I would serenade them graveside with the song they chose for their first dance at their wedding. Now, because this was 2005, well before the time of streaming music on smartphones, I, of course, did what anyone today would call old school, which involved borrowing our kids' sound system known as a boombox. Remember those? That played CDs. Again, remember those? It was a sizable, not to mention clunky sound system, and true to its boombox promise, put out a lot of bass and volume at the twist of a knob. I packed it into my car and headed straight for the cemetery. And placed the mass of solid state on my parents' plot, directing its formidable speakers toward their headstones. Whereupon, I popped in a CD containing the 1952 hit, Till I Waltz Again With You, recorded by Teresa Brewer. Till I Waltz Again With You was a Billboard best-selling single for 22 weeks, with 6 of those weeks as the #1 song. It was a hugely popular hit of the day, but more importantly, its lyrics resonated with my parents on a very personal level. The song, which I urge you to take a minute to stream after this podcast to enjoy for yourself, speaks tenderly to the ache felt by a couple deeply in love whose precious time together is marked by too much time apart. It's iconic and so emblematic of its time. During their courtship, Dad was an officer in the Army, then serving as chief of surgery at the U.S. Berlin Army Hospital. And Mom was a stewardess for Pan American Airlines, then living in Berlin. They met and would continue to meet up again and again at one of the very few nightclubs that survived World War II, bomb-ravaged Berlin, where they'd share a drink and a dance or two. Only problem was their busy schedules put a damper on them getting together as often as they would have preferred, until they could waltz again with each other. So that was the song that permeated St. Patrick's Cemetery when I decided to offer a boombox serenade to commemorate their 50th wedding anniversary. Well, Teresa Brewer's vocals bounced off of my parents' headstones right onto others surrounding it, shocking more than a few fellow mourners right out of their thoughts and prayers. Oops. I had hoped that by late afternoon, I'd mostly be alone in the cemetery, well, at least among the living. I found myself sheepishly apologizing for my temporary disruption, hoping that my fellow mourners would understand. After I explained to them the importance of the day, those kind souls nodded their heads in silent understanding. And as quickly as it disturbed the peace and serenity of the cemetery, the tribute song trailed off, restoring complete silence. And in that silence that followed, I looked to the skies and respectfully asked my parents for a sign that they were together. Surely I was deserving of one, given that heartfelt performance, not to mention the slight embarrassment I had to endure for such a shameless exhibition. I waited a good 10 minutes, which, as it turns out, is an excruciatingly long time to wait when you're waiting for the heavens to reply. But nothing. By 4:30 p.m., and with no sign of the clouds opening dramatically, revealing bolts of lightning or sudden, unexpected gusts of wind, I decided to hang it up. I mean, really, what was I thinking? That evening, my husband Greg and I met up with my sister Nola and her husband Bob for dinner at a wonderful restaurant in Huntington that is sadly no longer. Abel Conklin's, for my local listeners who may remember it, which happened to be one of my parents' favorites as well as ours. Nola and Bob also happened to choose September 17th as their wedding day, so we lifted our glasses to toast Nola and Bob's 10th and our parents' 50th wedding anniversaries. After which, I decided to share my pathetic cemetery story. My sister laughed and rolled her eyes at me, as she is often known to do. But then, something happened that I did not expect. Nola's laughter and smile all at once faded as she began to process something that seemed to throw her off kilter. After being lost in thought, Nola returned to the present and asked, about what time were you at the cemetery putting on this show of yours? Between 4 and 4:30, I answered. Nola's face flushed as she said, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this," and shared that something very strange had happened to her that afternoon. Somewhere after 4 p.m., she stepped out of her office to pick up some items at a nearby convenience store. After processing the sale, the proprietor dug into his cash register to give my sister her change. Something about his behavior gave her pause. It was in the way he pressed those 2 coins into the palm of her hand and held them there for a beat too long, as if he was passing something very important to her that she should take notice of. So, Nola did take notice. Rather than tossing the change into her handbag without a thought, as she normally did, Nola understood that she needed to inspect the change that was just handed to her. So, she looked at the date of the first coin, a penny. It was dated 1955. She looked at the second coin, that was also a penny, and its date, it was 1955. Now, what were the chances that 50 years later, in 2005, a person could get not one, but 2 1955 pennies handed to them in a single instant? 1955. the year our parents were married. Pretty incredible to imagine that two 1955 pennies were being pressed into my sister's palm while some 10 miles away, I was creating a nostalgic noise disturbance at St. Patrick's Cemetery. Looking to the skies at our parents' grave, asking for a sign that they were together. Little did I know that in the next county, my sister was getting the answer to my request. What's more is, had we not exchanged stories of what we were each doing around the same time that afternoon, we might never have connected those dots. Yes, indeed. Two 1955 pennies delivered by a convenience store cashier straight into my sister's hand. That, dear listeners, was no coincidence. Nope. That was definitely our parents, once again, giving us their 2 cents. If you listen to your music and podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or Amazon Music, please follow my podcast, Ungoverned with Joan Sergel, on those platforms. And if you like what you're hearing, please feel free to rate and review my podcast. You can also listen at my website at www.joansergel.com, where you can sign up to receive notifications of new episodes. And if you like, leave a message for me. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.